Hello everyone and welcome to our third and final unit of our Modern Global Issues course. This final unit is called Clash of Cultures, and we are going to take a look at a lot of different issues within this unit. Our primary focus is going to be on the crisis in the Middle East. We're going to look at some of the historical background, some of the historical clashes that happened in the Middle East as to why. One question that I often hear in this class is, why is there always war, or why do they hate us, or all these different kind of just overall questions. And frankly, I think a lot of those questions I get is because we don't understand the historical background of that region. And so when we hear these news clips of fighting going on in the region, we do often assume that it has been happening forever, that this has just been a constant war that's being fought in the Middle East, and that's just not the case. So we are going to look at what has happened both historically. We're going to look at what's happened more recently. We're actually going to end this unit talking about the rise of global extremism. So it won't just incorporate the region of the Middle East, but the entire globe. So I hope you guys enjoy our third and final unit. This first page, we are going to be looking at what is the kind of basis of this Middle East crisis. And frankly, it does stem from issues thousands of years ago. We're going to look at some of the major religious differences of some of the main groups that inhabit the Middle East historically and today. Now, whether you're referring to Judaism, Christianity, or Islam, all of them have their basis way, way back in a man named Abraham. In the Old Testament, in the Torah, in the Quran, all of these books do refer to, this is kind of the one person that pretty much all three of those religions has in common. From there, they kind of branch off into different belief systems. So we're going to briefly take a look at these belief systems. And again, I'm not necessarily pushing any belief system here, but we have to understand the background to understand what has happened in this region. So the earliest is Judaism, and we're going to take a look very quickly at kind of the background of that faith. For the Jewish people, they were one of the first tribes to have a monotheistic religion, meaning one God. Back in that era, the more common belief structure was surrounding with many gods, and where people would often worship nature, or a farming community might worship the river god. But the Jewish people established faith in a singular God, and they believed that they had a personal covenant with that God, and Abraham was kind of the centerpiece of that. Later on, they believed that they received the law that they should follow, it was given to Moses, known as the Torah. Now, fast forward a few millennia, and you arrive at Christianity around year zero, but more specifically in the 30 ADs, you would have a man named Jesus of Nazareth. We know historically he existed, but he was a Jew, practicing Jew. And after he was killed, you had basically his followers pick up his philosophy and spread it throughout the region. In particular, Christianity really took off because of the presence of the Roman Empire. They were able, especially the Apostle Paul, was able to spread the religion throughout the empire, and one reason it most likely is still with us today. Now, thirdly, we have the religion of Islam, and Muslims, as I said, do have that core belief in Abraham and Moses, and even believing in Jesus as a prophet. But they believe that a later prophet came, a man named Muhammad, and he was given divine inspiration. He was given, this book, the Quran, in which became the holy book of Islam, but believing that God had basically said that the word of God had been corrupted over the years, and that this was the true religion. Now, it did not take long after Muhammad died for the Islamic faith to break into two major divisions, and this is fairly common in terms of world religions. We often see different denominations often form very quickly, but in Islam, the two main denominations were Shia and Sunni. You'll see different spellings of that throughout some of our readings this unit, but the reason we go into that is because today, a lot of modern nations have their background in one of these two different denominations. And frankly, it forms a lot of the basis for some of the crisis. So even looking at the maps down below, you can see that a vast majority of Shia Muslims are located in Iran. And you'll see that a vast majority of Sunni Muslims are located in Saudi Arabia. Well, Iran and Saudi Arabia have one of the largest conflicts, one of the most tense conflicts in the Middle East, and a lot of it is based right here off of these differences in background. We're going to talk a lot about Iraq during this unit. Iraq has a good mixture. It's perhaps of all the nations, probably the most even in terms of division between Shia and Sunni Muslim, and that's going to help explain, why the invasion of Iraq in 2003 really descended into chaos and civil war. Well, it's because you had these rival powers, and there was a power vacuum that erupted. So we're going to cover all this, but you got to understand the basic background of the demographics of the people to understand why things have gone poorly at times throughout their history. Now, a big part of our focus over these first two lectures is going to be the establishment of the nation of Israel. Now, historically speaking, the Jewish people did inhabit the region that was historically known as Palestine. Now, when the Romans in 90 AD, they came through, and this was really towards the height of the Roman Empire, the Romans forced the Jewish people out. They destroyed the temple in Jerusalem and forced what became known as a diaspora. Ever since that time, even though some Jews did remain in Palestine, ever since that time, there has been this movement to try and return the Jewish people to this land historically known as Israel or Palestine. So that is referred to as the Zionist movement, and Zion being this promised land to the Jewish people. So we're going to see that by 1947, there's going to be a major political movement, kind of globally, to return this land to the Jewish people. Now, another big factor here at play is that in the 2,000 years since the Jewish diaspora took place, there have been people that have moved in. And for the most part, you have Arab Palestinians that have moved into that area, and that is kind of the basis of the conflict in Israel. And we'll get to that here in a second. But one thing that's formed more recently is this idea of Arab nationalism. Now, nationalism is a term you've probably come across before, but this extreme, this extreme pride in one's nation, but goes beyond that, right? Nationalism it isn't just patriotism. It's patriotism to an extreme belief, that, in fact, almost superiority. So what we see develop, especially in the 1940s, as the Cold War is kicking off, is we're seeing this rise in Arab nationalism that, especially under leadership like Nasser, the president of Egypt, we're going to see this push to try and unify North Africa and the Middle East because of those common cultural bonds, those historical bonds, the linguistic bonds. In 1945, they take this action politically. There were 6 original members of what became known as the Arab League. And again, this was formed, a lot of this in response to what was happening in the Cold War, where everybody was watching the world divide up between either the United States or the Soviet Union. And a lot of these Arab nations said, we don't have to align ourselves with one or the other. We have strength in our own culture, and so we have this rise of Arab nationalism. So when we talk about modern clashes, what we'll see is that in 1948, when Israel is established, basically you have the return of large Jewish populations, and these Arab neighbors around them is kind of the center of this conflict. So we're going to dive a little bit deeper into that, and like I said, that will be our main focus today and for our next lecture. So as we've identified, this land known as Israel historically had that name. The Jewish people that lived there, they were forced out during the Roman occupation in the 1st and 2nd centuries AD. If you were to fast forward a couple thousand years, you get to World War I. And reminder, World War I was fought from 1914 to 1918. Well, in the middle of that war, you had, this is towards the height of the British Empire. And at the end of World War I, the British assumed a lot of territory in what we call the Middle East. As the Ottoman Empire collapsed and the British basically took over a lot of their land, that included areas known as Palestine. As early as 1917, the British are going to basically make it known that they desired to create a permanent homeland for the Jewish people. And that became known as the Balfour Declaration. This is kind of the first time a Western nation has said, let's make a permanent home for these Jewish citizens. Now, in 1923, they're going to continue with that plan in what becomes known as the British Mandate for Palestine. And this is going to divide up part of this area where you do have on the western side Palestine, and then on the eastern side you have Transjordan, and today that is modern day Jordan. So the British are heavily involved here, and World War I, again, a major catalyst for global change, but it's kind of the basis of the conflict here in the Middle East. Now again, fast forward to after World War II, another major disruptive world event, and you have the creation of the nation of Israel. But this did not come easily. In 1947, the British went to the United Nations and they said, we want you to come up with a plan on how to establish this Jewish homeland. Well, what became known as the Partition of Palestine, the UN General Assembly decided to vote to create a nation of two states. There would be it was like a nation within a nation. One state would be Arab, and one state would be Jewish. Now, at the beginning of this plan, the Arab entities, they voted against this. They did not want this. They did not want a return of these Jewish refugees back to Israel. After all, I mean, historically speaking, they're saying, Arab Palestinians have inhabited this land for hundreds of years. It belongs to them. And, the Israelis have this historical connection. They believe that it is promised to them by God. You can understand kind of both sides here. The nations surrounding what we would eventually call Israel basically said, if you try to make an Israeli state, if you try to make a Jewish state here in the Middle East, we will destroy it. Okay, we will invade and we will destroy that nation of Israel. Well, in 1948, after this partition of Palestine was planned, in 1948, the final British forces left Palestine. And when they did, the nation of Israel was declared to be legitimate. Now, the first president of Israel will be a man named David Ben-Gurion, and he will get on the radio and he will state that the state of Israel has been created. Now, that was kind of the declaration that saying that this nation does exist, but they still had to defend themselves. They knew that as soon as they made this announcement that Israel was going to become a nation, that basically all of the surrounding Arab nations would go to war with them. And that is exactly what took place. Now, I do want to mention, I mentioned this is in the midst of the Cold War. Both the United States and the USSR, the Soviet Union, both recognize Israel within hours of this announcement. And I think there's a lot of different reasons for that. Both nations were seeking to get somewhat of a foothold in the Middle East. I mentioned earlier with the rise of Arab nationalism and the Arab League that none of these countries were really starting to align themselves wholeheartedly with either the U.S. or the USSR. So they thought, Israel could perhaps, be a friend to them. For the United States, we appreciated the fact that Israel planned to become a democracy, that they were going to have elections, and again, that was something we weren't really seeing throughout the vast majority of the Middle East. So each country had their own reasons here, but from the very beginning, the United States is taking the stance that Israel is a legitimate country, okay, and that we will come to their aid. We will help defend if necessary. This is an important point in both U.S. and Israeli history because, when we align ourselves and recognize Israel as being a nation, think of what that does to the relationship with the surrounding Arab nations. This is setting us on a crash course for the next few decades, really up until modern day, which kind of pits us against many of these nations. Well, as predicted in 1948, after the declaration of the creation of Israel, you do have the Arab nations surrounding it invade. This became known as the Israeli-Arab War, sometimes referred to as the Israeli War of Independence. But in 1948, the Arab League does announce their attack on Israel, and they begin to invade from all surrounding areas: Lebanon from the north, Syria from the northeast, Jordan from the east, Egypt from the south. It does look as if Israel is about to lose. I mean, that Israel, here desired by Jews for thousands of years, quite literally, it finally looks as if it's about to happen, and then all of a sudden they are facing annihilation within the first few hours that it has taken hold. But then you have a pretty big plot twist, and that is the United Nations gets both sides to agree to a month-long truce. There will be no fighting over a period of about 30 days. Now, within those 30 days, the call goes out throughout the world to Jews throughout the world to come join the Israeli military, stating that the state of Israel has been declared, that it is now time to return to the homeland and to help defend it. And by the time that 30 days is up and the truce, the ceasefire does come to a halt, Israel has the upper hand, and they are able to defend themselves and basically defeat the Arab neighbors around them. Now, the following year, they are going to sign an armistice agreement, a peace agreement between Israel and their Arab neighbors, which officially ended hostilities, but it also established the borders of Israel. And what they agreed to was, you can see on the map on the right, what becomes known as the Green Line between Israel and the nation to its east, Jordan. So Jordan would still hold on to some land which today Israel holds on to, called the West Bank. We'll get into some of the smaller divisions within Israel later on. But basically, this is what Israel looked like in 1949 after this agreement. Now, over the next few years, you are going to have quite literally hundreds of thousands of Jews move into Israel from all across the world: Europe, Asia, Africa, the Americas, basically moving back to help populate this modern state of Israel. And as Jews begin to return to Israel, what you have is kind of basically a diaspora of the Palestinians that were living there. They are forced into basically one of three areas that become Palestinian dominated, and that is the Gaza Strip, which is in the southwest corner of Israel, the West Bank, which refers to the West Bank of the Jordan River. You can see there, it's on the eastern side of what is today Israel. And then the Golan Heights, which is in the far northeast corner of Israel, and that shares a border with Syria. So this is the basis for the modern conflict. You have, the Jewish, Israeli controlled territories, and the Palestinians are being forced to live in smaller and smaller regions. Now, that'll do it for the background, how Israel got established, kind of the basis for the conflict. Next time, we're going to take a look at the multiple wars that were fought over the course of the 50s, 60s, and 70s as Israel defended itself and tried to remain an independent nation. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to email me. I'll be sure to get right back to you. Thanks.